Maybe I made her proud, and then you didn't.
So it was very dark. It was dark. There was lots of movement in the dark. So I was going to have you do something in class today that again picks up on where we were the other day, but also will give you a little bit more perspective on the Progressive era. Because remember, Franklin Roosevelt was the guy who was in this New York State legislature in 1913, passing and pushing for the reforms that address the shirtwaist factory fire, right? All of their deaths are burned. But now, in 1932, he's actually elected president. Now, here's the thing about this. During the campaign, he gives very little indication of what it is he might actually have in mind doing once he's actually elected. Hoover, on the other hand, had attempted to, one, create this government program to help out. It's kind of a joke. I showed you that people were making fun of him. He doesn't really achieve very much. It's also plagued by scandal. And on top of it all off, during the summer of 1932, he has the World War I veterans marching for elections. And what does he do? He sends out the army. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned it, the actual, how that order got issued, nobody actually knows. To this day, no historian has been able to determine exactly where was the order given and who gave it to actually send out the troops. We don't actually know that. But the response was problematic. But the whole campaign, Hoover's saying, well, I'm this whole Reconstruction Finance Corporation, I'm going to do more of that. Oh, and I have this idea for a banking plan, and it's going to reform the banks, and it's going to be effective, and so on. Roosevelt, with rare exceptions, sounds like a more traditional candidate. He's like, yeah, we have to be worried about the budget deficit. I'm not going to do anything too dramatic. He's making, essentially some usual kind of campaign promises, but he sounds pretty moderate. So Hoover is trying to sound like the radical. Like, yes, I'm really going to do this. Franklin is coming off as a moderate, and in retrospect, Franklin sounds like Hoover, and Hoover sounds like Franklin. It's like the two of them are in opposite roles of how we usually think of them. Once he's actually elected, Franklin then becomes the FDR that we know. He actually steals Hoover's entire bank money. He's like, yeah, that was a pretty good idea. I think we'll do that. And we're going to go into a little more detail about it, but he declares a bank holiday in March, right after he's in office. He creates the FDIC to insure deposits, and it's very effective. Now, let me ask you a question. The FDIC, any of you have been into a commercial bank, you see a big sign in the front of the bank saying that it is insured under the FDIC. What does that mean?
Like, if the bank goes under, you're guaranteed a portion of your money back.
Now it's up to $250,000. Before 2008, it was up to $100,000. Why would they need to do that?
Because banks were shutting down and because of the depression.
Okay, but what is insuring your deposit do?
It makes it safer if that bank goes down. If the bank goes down.
You can use multiple accounts, so you don't have to put all your money into one account.
Yeah, but let's back up a second. Remember panics?
Yeah.
19th century panics. Why were they called panics?
People panic now.
They panicked, but then what do they do? So they pull their money out of the bank, and if they don't get there, the bank collapses. Why is it important that banks have money in them?
So they can operate.
Because they can't loan it out if they don't have it. So if everyone goes and pulls all their money out because they're worried that the bank is going to crash, then the bank crashes, and then the bank has no money to loan out. And by the way, if you didn't get your money in time, now you're out at cash. So the result was a lot of people keeping their money in the house, like under their pillow. Incredibly effective. The bank closures go from 4,000 in 1932 down to 61 in 1934. And they had been in these really high numbers for 3 years. From 1929 through 1933, I think it's almost 4 years. But all of 1930, 31, 33, all these bank failures. And then they stopped because this was incredibly effective. It's also the reason, so we can actually say Hoover is responsible for the decisions made in 2008. Because it was in the September of 2008, the government decides that they're going to bail out the banks, which a lot of people were upset about. The reaction from a lot of the American public is, where's my bailout? So the banks screw it up, put us in a major recession, and you bail them out. Well, by the way, I'm out of the job, so where's my bailout? People were seriously upset in 2008 and 2009. And it had it been the 19th century, they would have been looking for these bankers in the street and beating them up. With a little more. People were very unhappy. I just read that a number of congressmen, this is recent, a number of congressmen who just voted on the health care bill last week hadn't actually read it. They passed it, they hadn't read it. Huh? Yeah, it is pretty important, but they hadn't actually read the bill. Yeah, well, one of them was he was a Republican from Arizona, maybe, and he was one of the guys who was trying to get other people in his party to actually vote for it. So he's rallying them to vote for it, but hadn't actually read it. And this came out in an interview with the CNN journalist who asked him about it. He says, well, I haven't actually read it. And then he's like, did I give you correctly? Did you just say you hadn't actually read it? He's like, yeah, I haven't actually read it. Now, they passed it without the Congressional Budget Office even doing the assessment, which normally we wouldn't want to do that, but they were so interested in getting it passed that Now hold on. When Roosevelt takes office, people were so desperate for emergency measures. Now the context is different, right? They want emergency measures. They have a new president. They're hoping he will do something. A whole bunch of people in Congress didn't actually read the legislation before they voted on it. So, for the New Deal. Now that's going to be somewhat important because, as you're going to see, it creates some unintended consequences. But again, their thinking was, it's an emergency, we're just going to let you go at it and figure out the problems later. But in fact, there do end up being problems later. I would say the healthcare, not much of an excuse. It's the same with the Chicago aldermen who all voted to privatize the parking meters in the city of Chicago, creating the highest parking rates in the United States. A lot of them had not actually read it before they read it. Again, they admitted it's late. And you have to wonder, that's the highest paid part-time job in the United States. Alderman of Chicago is $110,000 for part-time. And they didn't even read the legislation before they
Why would they read?
What?
Why would they be qualified to vote for it?
Because they were elected to actually read what it is that they're voting on.
Like, how do the people choice?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've wondered this for years. Like, how does the city of Chicago even function? Like, as a city? Well, at the state level, we certainly can raise the question, is Illinois functioning? No. If Illinois was outside the United States, we'd call it a failed state. We'd be up there with Somalia. Huh? Chirac. Let's get it. So, FDR is going to create what's referred to as the alphabet soup. And this is going to be passed, again, very quickly as an emergency measure, and they want to get some results very quickly. By way of having a conversation like this, I'm going to give this table the National Recovery Administration. And I'm going to give your table the Civil Works Administration. And I'm going to give your table the Works Progress Administration. And I'm going to give you the Tennessee Valley Authority, and I'm going to give you the Civilian Conservation Authority. And I'm going to give you the Social Security Act. I want to know if the Social Security Act doesn't just cover Social Security. There are 11 things in there. 11. Make sure you tell us about more than just one.
But like, what exactly are we supposed to do? Oh.
Are you on Wikipedia?
At Wikipedia, they'll probably characterize it as communism. Until someone comes along and edits it.
That's history for you.
It's like what I expect. It doesn't directly say.
Yeah, but it sounds like something Wikipedia would do. It's not communism.
Oh, these aren't words, this is a video. Thank you.
Bless you. Bless you. Are you okay?
Nah.
Do you need your stupid plant pill?
No, it's not a Moodle. I'm just asking you to try to find a good source on the internet.
It helped you and you know it.
Hey, what's the costume? I don't even know.
They give you a little bit of history.
I
will be back.
Chewy.
was there. What? He almost told me in 1973, they
I don't get it.
All I know,
failed.
all I know is it was like, oh, we should create jobs. But they were like really temporary jobs. Like,
Yeah, like a year.
I remember
Frickin' thespians.
Yeah. I hope not. I'm making it all the time.
Because Crow, the hustler. Basically back and forth, right? So had at 11.
I'm gonna go to simple Wikipedia.
Turn right around.
I could. Yeah, you can. I was like so good. Yeah, very proud of myself. I was bad. Things are also pissed.
Damn you.
The only thing that we have here is fear itself. Really? I haven't tried.
Jack, I'm a pirate.
Yeah. Oh my god, I hate it so bad.
Now I'm a velociraptor. See the difference? Isn't that amazing what numbers can do? This is why we need math. We need math to be able to tell if someone's being a pirate or a velociraptor.
Really? I just like, when it was high. No, don't, no, it was on someone's skin. Like, what is it?
I need geometry to tell if it's peace or velociraptor.
Probably that.
Is it peace or velociraptor?
Oh gosh, no, I just heard what you. Can't do it. I go for it. No, I haven't. How did that win? Oh, it was very successful.
It was not.
You said it was very successful.
For like the 26. It was a thing.
Or require them to help me
You know, like that. Of course you told me. Yeah, some people don't like it, but ever since I was little, I had it. I didn't know what it was for.
I'll bet you $1 million that you can't hum while doing this to your nose. You can't hum while doing this to your nose. Hum. I bet you $1 million.
What?
How does it work?
I don't know. But you have $1 million.
You're not doing it hard enough then. No, you have to go back more.
Do you need more time, or do you have an answer?
You have to go back.
Is this like a book fair pencil?
No, my mom got them online.
Oh, they're so cute.
My question is, do you have an answer so we can start the conversation?
Wait, what was the question?
The question is to tell us a little bit about the program. You don't necessarily need all the details. You just need like.
Was that a question?
Okay, fine. Let me start. I want to tell you a story about this picture. This is FDR's house. It's in Hyde Park, New York.
He's short.
Short. He was actually very tall.
Why is the bookshelf so tiny?
He doesn't need it to be big.
It's like that bookshelf. Like,
So how can I reach the bottom shelf?
You're gonna bend down.
just let me finish this. He was stricken with polio at age 40, which was unusual. He ends up in a wheelchair, and at his house, in the museum, they actually have this wheelchair. But that's not why I'm bringing this up. What's that? Yeah, they wanted it to look more or less in the condition it was in. At the museum, which is at his house, is actually the house he grew up in, so it's actually his parents' house, and then he stays there later. They have I was there on a grant, actually. I won some money to do research at the Roosevelt Museum. So all of his archives are there. What's that? How much money? Several $1,000s.
Okay.
While I'm there, what? No, I didn't want to rent a car because that's like a waste of money. So I stayed at the motel across the street from the museum. It was the only one. What? It was the only place to stay. And so and they had a refrigerator, so I basically bought a bunch of groceries, stuck them in the refrigerator, and I stayed there for a whole week, just walking in between my little motel room and the I was a grad student. This is the way to do things on the cheap, right? And I still have plenty of money left. So So anyway, and it was a nice walk. So anyway, so I go there. And the museum has, as every museum, a museum store. So I go in there. These two older guys, retired age, and they're working in the Roosevelt Museum store. And I say to them, I'm looking around the place, hoping to find some kind of reference to the National Recovery Administration. And so, like, well, it's incredible to me. So I mentioned at one point, I said to the guys, I'm surprised you don't have any NRA Blue Eagles.
Is that an NRA Blue Eagle?
Yeah, thank you. And the guys are kind of confused at what I'm saying, and so I look around the store, and I really don't see any kind of references at all to the NRA. And these guys are perplexed. Here they are working in the Roosevelt Museum, and they think that I'm talking about the National Rifle Association. You're in the Roosevelt Museum. You should know the National Recovery Administration. I shouldn't have to explain it in the Roosevelt Museum, but I did. And so they don't have any of these.
Is that Blue Eagle bald?
Why don't you tell me about the NRA?
Alright, so the NRA was pretty much put in place by the National Industrial Recovery Act.
The NIRA, which is the act that creates the agency. Yeah.
So what they did is their job was to pretty much consolidate prices and labor prices to make like American businesses competitive.
How did they do that?
So they limited the amount of money that like companies could have, or like companies could sell their products for, and then they didn't force people to. It was a voluntary program, but like they made people like unionize or de-unionize based on how little or how much.
Now that's the key part, voluntary. So the people there, they would be issued these. This is about 125 to 50% the actual size of the thing. Right, it's a little bigger on the screen than what that actually supposed to be. And they issue these things. They're like small posters, indicating that you have adopted the code of the National Industrial Recovery Administration and that you're going to follow its rules. And the idea was to promote these ideas, and people would do their business with other businesses that actually were recognized. This one is the very first one issued, so it's the historic one. They put that on display. Despite the fact that it's voluntary, and it does a bunch of things, legalizing unions for the very first time, sets up minimum wages, a 40-hour work week, putting a definition on all of the things that we actually understand, right, in terms of how the work week is structured and so on. It did that, and it was only voluntary. Yes? But what happens to it?
In like 1935, it got struck down in the Supreme Court.
So the Supreme Court, which had always been, throughout the progressive era, the Supreme Court is always behind the curve. They're like, no, you can't do this. Child labor, sorry, you can't ban child labor, so we still have child. Sorry, you can't set up a 40-hour work week and minimum wages, that's unconstitutional, so we throw that away. It's going to, when the Supreme Court does that, it's going to do two things. One is Roosevelt gets to work immediately on taking as much of the first New Deal as he can and restructuring it until it becomes the second New Deal. And a lot of things that were in the National Industrial Recovery Act end up recovered and turned into some new program. Not all of it, but a lot of it. The next thing he does is go to war against the Supreme Court, which, by the way, blows up in his face and gets him in big trouble. It doesn't actually work. Yes?
So why didn't the Supreme Court against this? Because this wasn't like, it wasn't like something that was enforced, it was just like,
yeah, no, and Roosevelt asked the same question. I mean, his position ultimately is, the problem is that the court is made up of justices who have been there a very long time, and they're very old, and they don't recognize to what point legal theory is in a different place than it was 20 years ago. And so he actually sets to stack the court and appoint a bunch of his own people. And that blows up because everyone, the public, the Congress, the courts themselves, they're like, wow, you're grabbing for power, buddy. You can't just stack the court with your own people. And there's a lot of pushback. It turns out if Roosevelt isn't been patient, there's about to be a death and a retirement, actually a very short order, and he gets to appoint 2 of his own people. But he wasn't patient. He wanted to push it at that moment. And he was very upset at what they did. Though in the end, the new structures that he puts in place in the second New Deal, in some ways are actually superior to what was in the first New Deal. Well, I'll explain. Because, no, I didn't actually assign it, but remind me, and when we get through the groups, I'll explain what he does in the second New Deal, which is actually better. So, what did I give your group?
The WPA.
Okay,
CWA.
Oh.
Sometimes it changed names a couple times. It was the WPA, the PWA.
We have the CWA.
Oh, the CWA. Okay.
Yes.
Tell us about the CWA.
It lasted for only a few months, and it was sponsored by the WPA.
Okay.
And the FERA. But it worked on like railroads.
The
No, wait, not
FERA, the
railroad.
Federal Emergency Recovery Administration, was similar to what Roosevelt had set up, but it's another one of those alphabet soup agencies, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it like fixed stuff.
It fixed stuff. Okay. Tell me about the stuff it fixed.
It created a lot of jobs, but they were like really temporary jobs.
Why is it only for a few months? Tell us all CWA stands for.
The
Civil Works Administration.
It was designed to be short-lived, and it was like for the winter. I think. That's what it says.
As you're going to hear, the CWA is basically doing the same stuff that some of the other agencies are doing. And it was, as she points out, intended just to get through like this short period, and then ultimately the other agencies are going to pick up the slack. When is it set up exactly?
1933 to 1934. 1933 to 1934.
Okay, so it's
The winter months.
winter of 33.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about the WPA. Now, with CWA, in order to explain the CWA, if we talk about the WPA and the CCC, it will start to make sense. Go ahead. Yeah, so going into the 1934 elections, it's very popular. A lot of people are very happy with it. Yes.
So, PTA workers would go highways, schools, hospitals, airports, playgrounds, firehouses, and stuff. It WPA is like work progress administration, with like bettering the community in the aspects like
Okay.
They also put like actors, writers, and other creative arts professionals back to work by sponsoring them.
Yes, there's a whole branch devoted to arts and humanities, so they're going to create jobs for artists, writers, musicians. Funding for all of these activities that otherwise these people would not be able to get work, and so it's all of them to work. There's also going to be well, actually I'll talk more about the details shortly. Do you have the CCC? Where's the CCC? What did you have? Okay, tell us about the CCA. The Tennessee Valley Authority.
Now, let's try it. Why not? Air.
So this may seem odd now, but there were a whole lot of parts of the country that had no electricity in the 1930s. And creating the TVA, which not only dealt with flooding, for instance, along the say Mississippi River and the levees, Cairo, Illinois, and all that stuff. They're also creating power plants to provide electricity to places that didn't have it previously. And they didn't have it because there was no economic incentive to actually build electric power plants because the population is sparse. Lyndon Johnson, who will go on to be president because he was Vice President when Kennedy was assassinated, and then Johnson. In the 1930s, he was a congressman in the House from Texas. And the big thing that he offered to the people he represented was electricity. Not through the TVA, but through a different program. But that's the kind of thing that's happening. Is that electricity is actually coming to rural America, and it hadn't existed before. People were still living in the 19th century with different technology.
You wanted to add things in the argument because it's just to remember.
Okay. So this is the Civilian Conservation Corps, and it was basically like a work relief program after the Great Depression so that like unemployed families and
Excellent. We don't just have a plan to see the difference between entertainment and art. Helping advertising
So they build parks and they plant trees. So
create something meaningful, something
by
memorable,
giving all of
something
this,
college students can write
it
perfect
was
papers
like
about.
giving people jobs.
Let's rewind a bit.
They also
Because
built
it's
parks
dramatically
for
different from
conservation and reforestation and
I agree
trees
with
on land that have been destroyed from fires and erosion.
And where did the money that they're paying to all of these men under 25, where's it going? Did you see that?
Because life is worth living. Mine isn't. You sure?
It turns out it's not going to them.
Yes, I'm broke. I have no friends.
It's going directly back to their families because the thinking here is that these are young men, they're unmarried, they're being put up in housing provided to them. They don't have any expenses, but their families have needs, so the money will go back to them, and then they can do what they need to with the money. Yes, and the men who are over 25, they might be able to get works with the WPA. But, go ahead, Eden. What does this look like? It looks like a military base. Good observation. Yes, it's a military vehicle. The guy is wearing a uniform that was very militaristic. It's actually my great uncle. This is my photo. He was in the CCC at Camp Green River, which was in Wyoming. And if you look here, you'll notice this is, again, it looks like a military base with barracks, right? And look in the barracks. Now it looks even more like a military base. It's like they're all being. Why is it scary?
It looks very like the campgrounds and like private places. Right? I'm right. It looks a lot.
Yeah, well, if you look really far back, Freddy is actually
That's what I'm saying. It looks
in the background there. You can barely see him.
weird and cut Pictures crooked. That's when the graphic doesn't
They all sleep.
That's how they grow.
Yeah, no.
I want to grow.
No, it's just this.
Now these next ones are not my. These next ones are not my uncle's pictures, or great uncle's pictures, but you'll notice this one is the CCC. This is setting up a CCC camp for the TVA. And as we just heard, it's like, they sound like they're doing different, very similar kinds of things. And now we actually have two groups that seem like they're doing similar things, actually working with each other, too. The guy, oh, incidentally, the Secretary of the Interior, a guy named Harold Ickes. I know it's interesting. He's the guy who's actually administering all of these programs. He was from Amstud. So we have this. No, the idea was that they're out in the middle of Wyoming. There's nothing to spend the money on. But their family actually needs the money to spend on necessities. And so the idea was, look, you're going to help out the families, and we're going to send the money directly to them. We're going to skip you entirely, give it to them so they can spend the money. And that's important because they, one, they need it. And two, when people are spending money, the economy starts to recover. This is the whole point of doing this. It's not just about relief, it's about stimulating the
Stop it.
Yes, and I'll talk about that in a moment. They borrowed it.
Stop it.
And this is part of the trouble. No one had ever done anything like this before, and it happens in a moment when John Maynard Keynes, who's an economist in London, has actually come up with this idea where, because when you reach a point in a recession where changing interest rates doesn't really work anymore, so your Federal Reserve Board can't really do anything to stimulate the economy, the government should step in and spend some money because governments can stimulate. The thing is, you don't want to do that all the time because then you're not actually producing. And so the idea is this is temporary. He also had the other part was when times are good, the government should be accumulating a surplus from taxation, sitting on surplus. And then when things are bad, they don't have to tax more, they can spend the surplus. They don't even have to borrow. The problem in reality, the theory is great. The problem in reality is that politically, our political institutions, pretty much every Western democratic institution, lacks the actual resolve and discipline to actually sit on a pile of funding for a rainy day. Nobody does that. They're like, oh, we're doing really great now, let's cut taxes. Which from the theories is the worst thing that you can do. Because then when you get into trouble, you have no money to actually spend, you have to borrow. Then you end up spending.
Get back in the play.
And I have more to say on that. So yes, the CCC is planting trees. You told me it looked like a military situation. All you have to do is grab your shovel and hand them weapons, and you have a built-in army.
Wow.
And I'm not exaggerating. My great uncle and a bunch of his friends, they go from the CCC directly into the U.S. Army to fight against the Nazis. Some of the same people, this is in the 30s, the war's not underway yet. But, you know, as long as they're under 25, they're doing the work. If you hit 25, you can't be in the CCC anymore. But if you haven't turned 25 yet and the World War II is underway, oh, perfect. Guess what? The Army needs you.
They fought World War II with shovels.
Yes, Josh, you missed that part? Any of you from St. Charles, Foxville area? That's the St. Charles golf course. I'll talk about Aurora momentarily. Potawatomi Golf Course in St. Charles. The golf course was a CCC project designed by this guy who was a very famous landscape architect because of his work during the New Deal. He had done like 2 projects in New York, and then suddenly he's a national figure. This is actually the building that's at Potawatomi. I think it's also a WPA project, but I have not been able to get confirmation on the WPA. Over this summer, if I'm lucky, I can do the research. It looks like one. If the era is correct, and the design is similar to what building, so I assume it should. Yes. They float bonds. Again, I will tell you more about this when I finish. Any of you been to White Pine State Park?
Yeah.
I mentioned it before. You go to Oregon, Illinois, there are 4 different state parks, but one of them is White Pines. They have little cabins you can stay in. You can actually rent these for about $100 a night.
Vacation overnight.
How expensive?
This was a New Deal project building these cabins.
Have you ever been to
We rode horses there.
Interesting you should mention that. I have a picture of New Salem too.
I live like right there.
If you're from Aurora, do you know Phillips Park?
Yeah. The zoo.
There's a zoo there.
The zoo.
What's at the very bottom if you keep walking down the hill?
Okay.
There's a lot of water, and there's an island in the middle of it. There's a lagoon, right? No, it's a miniature lake with an island in the middle.
A lagoon. Lagoon.
Yeah, there's a giant lagoon.
Like a peanut, like a lagoon?
Pond.
Pond.
There's an island in it. That was a CCC project. They created that. They dug it out, and as they were excavating, they discovered a mastodon. The skeleton of which is in Phillips Park in the visitor center up at the top.
What's a mastodon?
It's like a woolly mammoth, but smaller. And there was actually skeletons of other Neolithic animals in there as well, but the mastodon is actually on display there. This is a monument to those guys. This is also in St. Charles. If any of you have been through the main street, this is on Route 31. You'll see it's now some kind of design company. This was a post office built by the WPA. They did, yeah, these are my pictures. They built a lot of post offices. Any of you from Springfield or New Salem?
New Salem, that's the right.
So this is, remember I told you about Lincoln and all the people coming in from Kentucky? New Salem, this is a Kentucky design. This the port, the center porch on the 2 sides of the sign. That's just so cool. You would have found that in Kentucky, so all these people are building them these houses when they come, because that's what they're used to. It turns out, New Salem, with the exception of one of the buildings, all of those buildings were a WPA project. They reconstructed the old town. Okay, so this historic site was all part of the reconstruction project in the 1930s. I'm going to skip up here for a second because I'm looking for, there. You asked me about spending. So this is 1932. I showed it to you before. This is 1933. This is the results of the New Deal. 1936 is an election year. Okay.
Who got elected?
Well, 1934 is an election year too, but 1936 is the next presidential election, and unemployment has come down significantly. The bread lines have ended. Nobody has to worry about that. Unemployment is down. It's not great, but it's better than it was. A lot of people are working. In 1937, the president gets anxious because nobody had ever done this kind of deficit spending before, where the government is borrowing this much money and trying to stimulate the economy. And he's thinking, look, I got unemployment down at 14.3%. It hasn't been this good since Hoover's first year of the Depression. So what I'm going to do, now that we've dealt with the banks and the FDIC and all of that, going into 1938, we're going to cut back on our spending. And what happens? Unemployment shoots up 5 points. Huh? This is all Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh.
No, this is him. He's saying, look, we're worried about the deficit, and look what I've done. So we're going to cut back on the spending, and as soon as they cut back the programs, unemployment shoots back up. So what this graph tells us is, look, the government can stimulate the economy. It can. There's no denying that. But it also tells us that it doesn't actually do enough, in this case, for a full recovery. The only thing that happened is right here at the end of 1941, the Japanese bomb the United States and the U.S. goes full on into a wartime economy, and unemployment hits what's known as full employment. And so it's only with the U.S. being on a wartime economy where basically all able-bodied males are drafted or put into war industries, and then you have everyone who's left being put to work, including the women. Well, we've been able to hit very low. In the 1990s, we had full employment, and we hit an unemployment rate somewhere around 1.8, which is considered full employment. And that percentage depends. What you usually have is life cycles of people who are, it's not the same people completely unemployed all the time, but people are switching jobs. No. Economists are still actually discussing that because full employment is supposed to mean there's a lot of inflation. And what happened in the 1990s was we had both full employment and low inflation. It's not supposed to work out that way. And there is an obvious explanation, but I won't go into that.
I don't really understand what they're trying to do. Like, the more money there is.
So, remember when I was telling you about supply and demand, the basics, right? If you have a lot of supply and not enough demand, you have a lot of something but no one's buying it, so you have a problem. If you have low supply and high demand, that's actually a really good thing, right? When you're in a recession situation, you have a lot of stuff and not enough people to buy it. The thinking here is, if you can get money into the hands of the people to buy stuff, that will help the economy recover. Because then that huge body of materials that you're selling, people will have money to actually buy it. And so that will help the economy recover. So that's the thing. We know that you can stimulate it to some extent with government spending, in this case, academics. But we also know that that's not the be-all and end-all of the economy. Right? You need other things. And in this case, as soon as they pulled back on the government spending, unemployment goes back up and things like that. So I also told you Roosevelt is going to get himself. What was your question you asked me earlier, Alex?
Where do we get all the money?
Right. Okay. And so that's to this question. They were actually borrowing money, government bonds. Whoever will put up money for the bonds, investors. Yes. The United States has never, I told you before, ever since the 1790s when Alexander Hamilton first came up with this idea, the United States has never defaulted on any of its loans.
Who was it, Iceland and Greenland?
Iceland, after the recession, they got themselves into big trouble because they had this kind of really bad situation with speculation. They basically defaulted on all their loans. And they basically said, no, sorry, we're just not paying them. You shouldn't have been loaning us so much bad cash. It's your own fault.
Yeah, point.
Yeah, some people said actually Iceland does have kind of a point, and so they treated their creditors buying the bonds like any other investor, and they just defaulted. But the United States has never done that. We'll see what Illinois does. We're getting really close to the category where we are about to default on all our loans. But we're not there yet.
I don't want to. Wait, so where did the government get the money to pay them back to the bonds? The bond, so when they borrow the money.
Okay, here's the thing. When unemployment is really high, okay, when unemployment is high, who are you going to tax? Your tax base drops. When you're over here, though, the economy has now improved. You have full employment. You can actually tax people again, even at higher rates. In fact, the marginal tax rate at the highest income brackets is going to hit 90%. Okay, so that means, let's say you're a millionaire, which was the situation. So you're a millionaire. Every dollar that you make over $1 million, you're taxed 90 cents on the dollar. Oh, you get to keep 10 cents of them. That was what they came up with. And they kept that system through the 1960s. That's how you pay back the bonds. So we didn't hear from your group, did we? You were the last ones to go. Tell us about Social Security.
It comes in 11 different forms.
It does. Tell me about the 11 different forms.
Much like gender and spectrum.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I appreciate all the clever metaphors, but I would like to hear just what it is.
Oh, okay. There's multiple things. It basically
if you got old, they paid, if you got money, and if you were physically incapacitated to give you money, that everyone else is working. If you got old, you were working anyways throughout your life.
Okay, so when we hear Social Security, we usually think of just the retirement system. In terms of the Social Security Act, we created not just that retirement system, because nothing like it has existed before. It also includes unemployment benefits, benefits for people who are blind and disabled, people who are on disability because they're injured at work. So there's a whole series of these programs where people are getting, yes, it's a form of welfare, but it's the retirement plus all these other things. All of that was a result of the second New Deal. That is, the first one has been thrown out. So Roosevelt creates the Social Security Act, creates the system. There's actually there's an additional story explaining how that comes about. And the Wagner Act, which is the one that offers protections to workers and creates a National Labor Relations Board, legalizes unions and creates a kind of court system to address their issues. All of that is, again, the second New Deal. And I told you that the second New Deal, in some ways, actually strengthens what had been done before. We might want to talk otherwise. My main point, this is the last thing, because I won't see it until Thursday. This was so ad hoc, people voting on legislation they hadn't even read. You get a lot of overlap. You notice there's a lot of kind of duplication of efforts, and in some cases wasted efforts. You have starving people and they're destroying crops, right, in order to raise prices. So, oh yes, Wednesday, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. But I'll see you in English, right?
Oh!